Hello and welcome to Professional Speaking. My name's John Ball. Quick editorial note before we start. This episode is a republish from early 2021 and it went on to become the most downloaded episode in my show's history. Some political and pandemic references very much reflect that moment, but the principles in the episode are timeless. My promise for you is that today you're going to learn how great leaders and speakers use language to move people and why emotion often beats logic in the real world. Most speakers and leaders still rely on corporate jargon, flat messaging, and information dumping that never really lands. Simon Lancaster breaks down rhetoric, metaphor, and simple persuasion tools that you can use immediately without sounding manipulative. You will leave with clearer language, stronger emotional impact, and a more credible leadership voice. And I will quickly add this, one great reason for republishing this show is that audio technology is so much better than it was that I've been able to clean up the quality of this episode as well as realign it with the new branding of the show. So let's get into it. It's really exciting to be joined by the political speechwriter. He's the author of several amazing books. The one I read most recently is called Winning Minds. His name is Simon Lancaster. So welcome to the show, Simon.
Thank you for having me on, John. It's a pleasure.
Listen, I know we haven't even really covered half of what I could have put into an introduction because you are also a professional political speechwriter and you've worked with many politicians over the years.
Yes, that's right. It's 20 years. It was 20 years ago today that I started writing speeches. And the first person I was writing for was actually Alan Johnson when he was a junior minister at the Department for Trade and Industry. And he was the guy who really sparked my love and fascination of language. He was brilliant with words himself. And obviously now he's written loads of best-selling books. His autobiography, I think, is now on to volume 4 or something like that. So really, he was a great guy to work with, and he inspired me and really got me going into speech writing.
Fantastic. But when you very first started speechwriting, did you know that that was something that you wanted to start doing? Or was it something you fell into or just realized you had a bit of a gift for?
I always really wanted to be a songwriter. This is where my passion for everyone. And I was sending my songs off to record companies all the time. Never got anywhere. Never earned a penny for a single song. But then all of a sudden I found that speech writing is really similar in so many ways. You find the theme, you stick to recognized templates, the simplicity of the metaphor, the ideas, language, and moving people. A lot of what I do actually is taking techniques from music and turning it into language, really, turn it into spoken word.
One of the things that really relates to that I got from the Winning Minds book was about the fact that you mentioned bands, the Beatles and organizations Disney have used language, emotional language, creating emotional language very well. They're really good at it. And you talk in that book about creating these word clouds from these masters who do the language of emotion very well, and that really we should all be focusing much more on the emotion than on things trying to logically persuade people.
Yeah, and absolutely. And that's what Disney does so well. It's what bands do so well. And if you contrast that with most corporate speak, we're laying down the foundations and driving change. And if we use our growth wheel and we execute that in all of our key markets, and it's just, what the hell are you saying here? But you contrast most corporate rubbish with the simplicity of The Long and Winding Road or Mountain High, River Deep, or any of the great songs, really. And you just see such a massive difference. And so give me a load of corporate bullshit, and if I would experience try and turn it into some Lennon and McCartney thing that plants an image in people's minds, that moves them emotionally, that takes them on some journey. That's what you want to do.
Definitely. Well, super important stuff. The first thing that I ever saw you in was your TEDx talk on the language of leadership. And I was blown away by it. Sometimes there's a big gap in levels between TED and TEDx stuff, but not in this case. This is one of my, probably is my favorite TEDx talk I've ever watched. And one of the reasons that is, before watching that, And I think it was a few years back, but before watching it, I had never encountered the idea or the understanding of rhetoric and the art of ancient rhetoric. And as someone who's done all public speaker trainings and has read up on influence and persuasion, I was like, wow, there's this whole thing that's been there for thousands of years and no idea about. And so then I got a little bit hooked on that and started reading and learning much more about rhetoric. But for the audience some of the audience may never have encountered this before, can you tell us a bit more about what the art of rhetoric is?
I certainly can, and thank you for your kind words, John, as well about TEDx. I'm glad you enjoyed it so much. The rhetoric is the art of persuasion, and it's something that actually used to be taught in every school. It was seen as a core part of the curriculum back in ancient Rome, on the basis that people couldn't function at all, really, in society unless they knew how to persuade other people. You couldn't be a politician, you couldn't be a lawyer, you can work in finance or business successfully unless you knew how to persuade people. And this is pretty damn obvious, but it's something that through the years has just slipped off the curriculum almost completely. They talk about oracy in the curriculum. Oracy is much about speaking as it is about listening. It's still not really the dirty arts of persuasion that ancient Romans used to get into, but it's basically the art of persuasion. There are all these fabulous little tricks that you can use very, very simply in order to make yourself more persuasive when you're speaking, when you're writing. So, for instance, the very simple idea that if you put things in threes rather than fours, which in ancient Roman rhetoric they called tricolon, which sounds a weird part of the digestive system, but put your arguments into threes. I never learned that at school. I learned, all useless rubbish at school, really. But stuff, how to persuade people, should be right there. It should be at the centre of the curriculum, really. Not only so we understand how to persuade people, but also so we can understand when other people are trying to mislead us, are trying to deceive us. And particularly now with everything that's gone on in the States in the last week or so, and also what's gone on in Britain over the last few years, an ability to properly dissect arguments and being able to sniff out this is a load of bullshit, actually, is surely a core skill for citizenship.
You would think it should be. And one thing that stood out for me that you mentioned in your talk, and then there's so many great points in it, and anyone hasn't watched it, for the replay and for the podcast that goes out, it'll be a link in the show notes as well, so you can go and check it out. But you mentioned that there's only one school in the UK that teaches rhetoric anymore.
Yeah, well, it's Eton places it slap bang in the centre of everything. So they've even got mock House of Commons, as I understand it, there, a debating chamber that I think costs 11 million quid or thereabouts, some ludicrous sum of money. And of course, this prepares people to then reach the top of public life. So you just think of the people who have serious influence in the UK today. Well, the Prime Minister went to Eton, the Archbishop of Canterbury went to Eton, the second but one heir to the throne went to Eton, and they're all speaking a language of persuasion that really your average citizen just doesn't understand at all. And I think when you look at people, Boris Johnson in particular, who uses rhetoric really very, very effectively in order to achieve all sorts of dubious ends, in my view. I think people should be aware of it. You look at some of the way that he's played the COVID debate, where it's a literal matter of life and death, and the way that he'll create diversions from the issue, the way that he'll appeal to things, courage. Come on, we're Great Britain, we should be brave, we shouldn't be afraid of going out, and that precisely demonstrates why it's something that should be taught.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a contrast to how you open Winning Minds talking about Boris, because at the start of that you talk about his talk at the Olympics, and that even you and your wife, who are politically fans of his, got swept along with the emotion of the talk there.
Yeah, because he really taps into the essence of what drives human behaviour. I think better than any politician, literally any politician that I can think of in Britain, going back, be better than Blair, better than Thatcher. He gets what motivates people. And so he'll pick a virtue courage, decency, whatever it is. And then he'll corral people around that. His use of humour, his use of metaphor, his use of imagery. And of course, this is the thing that when you can use rhetoric itself, a lot of people view rhetoric in a pejorative way. They think it's inherently bad, which it's not. On its own, it's morally neutral. It's a pen. You can use it to achieve good things, or you can use it to achieve bad things. And I think that overall, when Boris was mayor, he used his extraordinary skill in order to make the capital feel quite proud, and he put it into infrastructure projects and stuff. And so it felt pretty good. And I think what he's achieved in the last few years, Brexit was obviously incredibly divisive here in the UK, and also what's happened with COVID. And has he been using rhetoric for good on those? Well, different people on different sides of the political debate will reach different views. But certainly, I think when he was mayor, he was special because he had actually attracted appeal from more supporters. Now he's speaking to a smaller group. I think still very substantial, and he's still the best in the field by a mark.
How would you rate Sir Keir Starmer then in terms of speech making?
Well, frankly, within the privacy of this conversation, I think it's hopeless. I think he fails on pretty well every count. I don't think he looks at ease with himself when he's speaking, which I think is a critical no-no. You need someone, I think, to listen to. They might have an infectious energy about them or something. And Keir Starmer, I've really struggled he doesn't look comfortable, when he speaks. He has a patronising tone, I think. There's something about his voice. A lot of it is about the body language, I think, that puts me off. I think his speech is boring. I think they're trying to be all things to all people, but actually being nothing to anyone in the process. I think good speakers do need to say what they really, really believe from the bottom of their heart. I'm not sure I've ever seen Keir Starmer speak from the bottom of his heart. I'm not sure he can. He looks a very uptight individual. Sometimes you see him and he's got red face and stuff, and I've come across a few people that have worked with him over the years, and currently I'm not sure he's necessarily an easy guy to work with. I'm not sure he's very laid back in the office.
Right.
Quite uptight. And this is a problem for a leader. You want, it's a bit more Gordon Brown or something, like you feel a bit uncomfortable when you're listening to them. We'll see how he does. It's still early days, but bearing in mind the year that Boris has had, to see him still, Keir Starmer today is lower than Corbyn was in 2017.
It's really interesting, and I think before speaking to you today, I've got one of mine's on audiobook, and then so I thought I'd have a refresher before we spoke, just to make sure that get to the bits that I really wanted to get to from that. And in that book, you talk exactly about this, the language of leadership and how important this is, and how the facts may not matter nearly as much as the emotions that you can actually get people to feel when you speak. And I was fortunate enough to have someone else who I managed to persuade to come and be a guest on my show, a philosopher, an expert in Stoic philosophy called Donald Robertson. And one of the reasons why I was so keen to speak to him, other than I love Stoic philosophy, was also that he talked about the birth of public speaking, the early days of the Roman Senate, and that the senators had to learn oration, they had to learn public speaking skills. And talking about Cicero, and especially we focused on Marcus Aurelius, and that he was expected to learn these skills and to be able to deliver passionately, but also to deliver competently and confidently. And that skill is still now just as relevant, if not more so, than it ever was even all that time ago.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that too many leaders who don't do too well, they think that all they need to do is just read out words, and that'll get them through. And just being bureaucratic. Leadership is about the feelings you create in people. It's about making people feel they're part of something bigger. It's about making people look to the future with confidence. It's a really exciting thing. Leadership is the essence of what brings people together, how communities are created when it's done well. And I think for too many people, leadership is just a title that is slapped on their name badge. Well, it says team leader on my badge, therefore I lead people. No, leadership is about creating strong emotional feelings in people where they'll then go the extra mile for you. And I know as a speechwriter, just in my work, when I'm writing for someone that I've got a really strong emotional connection with, I'll be thinking about their speech constantly. I won't get it out of my head until it's done. It's their burden that I'm carrying for them. Whereas sometimes it can just be a job. And if you're a leader that really wants to create a strong company or a strong political movement, you need that emotional connection with people. They need to see that you're part of the same tribe as them, that you share their values, you value the same thing, but you're on the same journey. You've got the same world's outlook. That's where you want to get to.
Yeah, I guess that must be, I think you mentioned it in your TED Talk, it must be one of the challenges of being a speechwriter, that once the words have left the page and gone off to the person delivering them, the delivery is out of your control.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes this can be a grimace type. You're standing at the back of a room, kind of chewing your nails off. There was a fab picture that I shared on Twitter recently of Justin Trudeau's speechwriter, watching him as he was delivering a speech, and she went through that literally the whole range of human emotions, from elation to exasperation and the proper head in hands moment. And as a speechwriter, you're not trying to mold a public image. There's a kind of a popular misconception of the speechwriter as Machiavellian puppeteer, almost guiding these leaders into all dark places. And really, it's much more that as a speechwriter, you're an impressionist. This is what you're trying to do. You're really trying to get in there. So you're trying to find what's your passion, what really makes you tick, what's the thing that wakes you up in the middle of the night. Forget all of this bullshit about the corporate strategy and all of that. What's the thing that really upsets you in the world that you would really love to change if you had the power to do it? And that's where I want to get to. So my speechwriting sessions with clients are actually probably more a therapy session than an episode of the thick of it or the West.
Yeah. Do you think it needs to be the case that, I don't know, I've never written a speech really for someone else to deliver, but when you're doing that, I assume, or imagine at least, that you get a brief as to what to deliver. From the sounds of what you say, you have some meetings with the client as well. Do you ever write speeches that might be delivered by different people, by maybe the person, maybe not knowing the person who might be delivering it?
Yeah, regularly. I've regularly done. It's different with all of my clients. The more access that I get to the principal, the person that's actually delivering the speech, the better it's going to be. Otherwise, it can feel a little bit, you're fumbling around in a dark room trying to find a small key. But nevertheless, so there are times where I'll get no brief whatsoever. I don't get access to the person. They just want the speech. They want some content. And then because everyone has quite an internet presence now, particularly public figures, I can do some good detective work. It'll give me some clues to their style of voice. So you always want to decode their voice. You want to get an idea of the buzzwords they use. Are they long word people or short word people? Long sentences or short sentences? What are their metaphors? What are their interests? And then you'll try and weave some of that in as much as possible. And you can do a fair job with that because people do have a lot of their own content online now. So you can anticipate what they're going to say. But really, there's nothing better than when I've got a client and we'll do a little session on Zoom and we can really talk about the speech and I'll get them. I have a series of fun little exercises that I'll work through with them to really find out what they want to say.
Excellent. I want to come back to your speech writing process with people. It's something I didn't actually think to even ask you about before we spoke, and should have. But the one thing I do want to definitely make sure we get to is to discuss a bit more the language of leadership, because you talk particularly in the book about having to overcome the instinctive mind, or have to win over, I should say, the instinctive mind and the emotional mind much more than the logical mind, although you do talk about that in the book as well. What do you mean by having to win over the instinctive mind and emotional mind?
But to show people that you're a good person, you don't represent a threat to them, that you have their interests at heart, you're on their side. We all have this little caveman brain, which is always trying to guide us to safety and away from danger. And so it's speaking to that. So it's the archetypal bad leader for me. It's the one that will make people feel petrified, constantly making people feel petrified about whether or not their job is secure. And that, to people with schizophrenia, they can't be at their best. There's no way you can be at your best if you're feeling afraid. So it's really about showing people you're a good person or on their side, which you can do in all ways. You just think about, let me pick someone, not a divisive figure like Trump or a Boris, but someone Obama that probably most people would agree with. He's universally admired. And you just look at some of the things about him, you think back to when we first saw Obama on the national stage. What was it that in all our minds said, this is a good guy, we can trust this guy? And most people would give different answers, but I would just point to that about the way he holds himself, his body language, his composure, his sense of humour, the historic references that he would weave into Lincoln and Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King and all of this. And his breathing was so slow and so steady. You just listened to that voice go on for hours and you just knew that you were in safe hands. And you contrast that with Trump and we're losing. We don't win. Look at Mexico. Look at China. Look at these socialists ripping up our constitution. All of this. And you're on edge. And it's about making people feel safe, I think, when we're talking about the instinctive mind. That can keep them safe.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree that Obama is an incredible speech maker and very just incredibly watchable. And he and Michelle Obama, she is also, in my opinion, at least a very good speech maker, and she has great delivery too. So I don't know if she got coached by Barack or if she was already, maybe she coached him, but the other way around. But both of them seem to be very gifted in that part.
Yeah, the difference between the two is stark, and it shows the challenge for the speechwriter, because you'd never hear Michelle Obama deliver a Barack Obama speech. Barack Obama is high on rhetoric, and so he uses things like rule of three, rhetorical repetition, the breathless sentences, the grandiose metaphors and imagery, whereas Michelle Obama is far more conversational, colloquial, chatty, all of these kind of just much more relaxed style of voice. Both have speechwriters. I've met speechwriters to each of them and had some insights into their drafting process, but both of them equally effective in their own way, which does show that it's not that there's a uniform way of speaking, but rather instead that you need to be true to yourself. You need to bring out your best self and connect with people emotionally in some way.
Other than in the political arena, who else is there that you may be able to point to who is just masterful in terms of utilizing rhetoric and speech making?
Because, well, he's the man at the moment. He's going to become president of the United States next week. Joe Biden, actually. I think he's certainly not someone who anyone could call a natural orator. Sure. Most of his career has been characterized by gaffes when he was speaking and accusations of plagiarism. And yet you look at his speeches now, they're stuffed to the brim with rhetorical devices. The rule of three, contrast, metaphor, practically every single line of his speeches utilizes one or other of those devices.
We'll definitely be seeing a lot more speeches from Joe Biden and probably from Kamala Harris as well.
Yeah, Kamala Harris, she's someone that I think has far more that authentic thing. But Biden feels to me a little bit manufactured. I don't think it's his voice that you're hearing. I think he's trying to be Obama. It doesn't feel very authentic to me. Whereas Kamala Harris, I remember her speech that she did when she was trying to be president, where she quoted Bob Marley and talked about her upbringing and what it meant to come from the exotic origins that she came from. And I remember being pretty blown away and thinking, wow, you're special, could see you going all the way. And chances are, I think she'll become president, won't she? I don't either during this term, or if not, I think she'll be very well placed come 2024. Like, to be honest, after the 2020 election, the prospect of watching another US election just does my head in a bit, but it was completely by then. Who knows?
One of the things that struck me the most from learning from you specifically was about metaphor. And it's not a new concept to me. I've come across metaphor before. I think most of us have. But perhaps not everybody realizes just how common metaphor is in language and also how persuasive it is. And you really go into some nice detail in the book about how different kinds of metaphor in language elicit different kinds of emotional feeling.
Metaphor is, I think, the most powerful form of political communication. But you can do things, create a rhyme or put an argument in threes, and it will become more memorable. But if you really want to change the way that people perceive something, you want to be changing the metaphors that you use. And so a good example for anyone who's listening, who's in business, you want to look at what the underlying metaphor that is used. When we use a metaphor, we say something is something which it is not. What you get in a lot of companies is they will speak about their business as if it's a car. They'll talk about driving change, accelerating reform, putting turbochargers on, having a change of gear. They'll put the components in place. If they're trying to help staff, they might issue a toolkit, an engagement toolkit. What's an engagement toolkit? A mouth. And so they're speaking using the metaphor of company as car. And that feels great if you're a leader or you're in charge of strategy, because there would be nothing more seductive than to imagine that running a company is as easy as driving a car, that all you need to do is flick the ignition, put your foot down, change gear, you can go wherever you want to go. It's an illusion, but it's comforting for the leaders. So they'll use that metaphor. We're driving this through. If you're in that organization, that metaphor says to you, you're a nut, a bolt, a component, a piece of machinery. You're there to fulfill a function. You're not a human being. You're dehumanized. You are not human. And so for them, they will reject that metaphor. They will not want to listen when you've got that metaphor going on. So what metaphor could be better? Well, metaphors of family for a company. So speaking about all of us together, where we're going, creating a sense of momentum, the long and winding road, mountain high, river deep, of the imagery that we were talking about, that could resonate more, not in a cheesy way, but just stripping out some of the awful language and introducing it with that, and you'll change the way that people feel. And this is when you look at a lot of political debates, you see the actual argument which is going on is often about no more than a different metaphorical outlook. So with Brexit, if you were a Remainer, the EU was a family in which kept us safe, was our home, in which we were loved with family members. If you didn't, the EU was a prison in which we were trapped and chained, set to the shackles of a big bureaucracy. We needed to take back control, have a clean break from that prison. And so they're different metaphorical outlooks. If you can change people's metaphorical outlook, you can shift the dial on an issue. And I've done heaps of different research projects where I've tested all issues. Should we leave the European Union? How much should we give to the European Union? Where you just introduce a metaphor or change the metaphor and you shift people's reactions to that by doing nothing more than either inserting or changing metaphor. So very, very powerful. Of course, with COVID at the moment, a lot of the conceptualization in the popular imagination is metaphorical. It's an invisible enemy. We're fighting, we're combating. We've now got the vaccine. With Jab's army was the front page of the newspapers today. This is a metaphor. It's not the only metaphor that could have been used to talk about COVID. When COVID first came in, people were talking about a house on fire. We were walking around a burning house, which I think is really good because fires spread very, very quickly and they threaten lives and you need to quickly get in there and extinguish it. I think that leads you to very, very decisive action. I think the war metaphor actually led to everyone just being shocked. What do? Froze. And it worked for Boris Johnson and for leaders around the world because it enabled them to take emergency powers. It set the context for taking emergency powers. It grabbed everyone's attention. Did it get us all doing everything that we should have done? Not. I don't know. Genuinely, I don't know. I've not done research on COVID metaphors specifically, but I've been watching them with fascination and always curious. Oh, I wonder what the effect would have been if they'd have shifted to this metaphor or that metaphor.
Yeah, and it's amazing just how much influence in life that can have. And I think one of the things you said in the book is that we just don't even notice how much it gets used in conversation, the frequency with which we'll actually deploy or hear metaphors in conversation. Most of it, you might notice some of them, but you certainly don't notice all of it because we're so used to speaking in that language. But the idea that metaphor could potentially be the thing that makes the difference between whether you react positively or negatively to something as well. It's like, well, we should definitely all be checking in with our metaphors and listening out for that. Do you find as someone who does this thing professionally that you're always listening out for that, or do you actually consciously have to tune yourself into it?
I notice metaphors are probably a little bit more often than I should do. I try to remove that filter as much as I can, but it's a bit like a musician listening to music, that you might recognize a particular chord change or a particular genre or whatever it is. It doesn't ruin your pleasure of conversation or anything. I don't go to dinner parties and say, you're using a war metaphor, you're a bad person.
Of course.
I wouldn't get asked back, I don't think.
It could create some interesting situations at the dinner parties where you might have to deploy some of your own metaphors to try and smooth things over. But interesting to notice that. So I love this whole idea of metaphor and that it gets used so much. What do you think people could actually do to become a bit more aware of that, or to try and maybe master, might not be the wrong word, but to start developing some competency with metaphor and how they deploy them, especially as a lot of the people who I aim the podcast to are doing either presentation work, public speaking work, workshops, trainings, things where they are actually speaking in front of other people.
Yeah, I think awareness is actually the first thing. If you're metaphor aware, then you've got a hell of an advantage over a lot of people, because most people are not aware of it. And then taking it forward to recognizing your responsibility as a leader, that the language which you use really deeply affects people's state of mind and the way that they feel. With metaphor, you're speaking to their subconscious. If you're creating all of this petrifying war imagery, which being reinforced day by day, you're getting into people's dreams. And it's quite a responsibility that leaders have, the language that they use. So just watching out for that and behaving a good human being. Really, there's a lot of fuss at the moment, obviously, about Trump and the language which he used. His speech on 6th of January, was this a speech that actually incited people to go and riot? Now, I've gone through that speech. It wasn't actually, to my eyes, it wasn't too different to all of the other rally speeches that Trump has given over the years. He's always used war metaphors. He's always used fight metaphors. When he launched his campaign to become president at Trump Tower in, I think, August 2015, he used a fight metaphor throughout the introduction. He used, as I recall, he used the word beat 6 times. He used the word kill twice and the word victory twice, all within the first 200 words of his speech. So he's always used this fighting language. But of course, the case against Trump now is that he wasn't using metaphor when he was speaking on 6th of January. He was saying, we've got to fight. We've got to fight. I have to say this to me, as someone who's been working in this field and thinking about metaphor, writing speeches for politicians going back years. For me, this was not an appeal to insurrection, what he did on 6th of January. This was a bog standard Trump speech. He was using a war metaphor. We often conceptualize politics as a war, and we have done for years. Joe Biden's whole campaign, when Joe Biden launched his campaign in 2020, it was the battle for the soul of America. I don't think he was appealing to people to get out machine guns and go and start shooting up the White House or whatever. But again, it does show why you've got to be careful, because I think there's a real danger as well that in today's partisan world, we judge people on the other side of the argument to the one that we're on very, very differently to the way that we judge people on our own side. A lot of the people that were condemning Trump's Rhetoric on the 6th of January were cheering to the rafters when Arnold Schwarzenegger earlier this week gave a speech in which he was literally brandishing a sword.
Yeah.
If Trump had done that, I think there'd have been questions asked. So we've always just got to be careful about the consequences of language and just appreciating that everyone looks at things a different way. I have my political views. I'm not tribal about politics. Some people are, but I always try to be aware, what do people on the other side think? And I actually have more friends probably in political parties I disagree with than with my own favoured political view. And I think that thing is really important as well. Just recognize that everyone's viewpoint is valid and it's just different perspectives.
Yeah. I have key friends in the US who are Trump supporters. I don't see it. I don't get it, but they're lovely people. And well, they see something that I don't, or they're getting information or news in a way that I don't. And they're acting on their beliefs. But as people, I'm not going to turn them away just because they vote for someone who I really don't very much. And same in the UK as well. It's not tribal about politics. I have my political beliefs, whatever they may be, and they tend to be fairly left of centre, I guess. But that's a healthy debate, and we should be able to have conversations with people we don't agree with, and have civil conversations with people who we don't agree with, because we just might learn something. This idea that we're always right or we can't change our minds about something is dangerous, in my opinion. We should always be able to change our minds about things. We should always be open to new information. And I with you there.
Metaphor can be really helpful here, John, because metaphor can give you the clues into someone else's perspective when you analyse them. And if you have a Remainer saying this is suicide, we're committing suicide, leaving the European Union, as many Remainers said, and then you have someone else, no, we're breaking free. Each have these wholly fictitious narratives running in their heads. In actual fact, leaving the European Union, it's definitely not suicide, and it's definitely not leaving a prison. Both sides are hugely exaggerating and distorting the real position. Chances are we'll leave the European Union, life will go on as ever it did. And no one much will really notice, apart from a few people that maybe worked in the European Union representing the UK government. Life will go on. But if we have these powerful narratives running in our head, it then, like I was saying, it gets into our subconscious. It wakes us up in the middle of the night. And so hence the responsibility that leaders have to speak carefully, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that, and that idea of listening to that and sometimes maybe pulling apart some of that metaphor that people are using and saying, the hyperbole is used so commonly now and really to some degree, great exaggerations of hyperbole. And I think that's maybe one of the things that is behind the extreme levels of divisiveness. But we are bombarded with that all the time. I think a lot of media, so I think if they don't use that grand hyperbolic sort of metaphor, that they won't get eyes, they won't get clicks, they won't get audience. And so we see it all the time. And maybe people think that they have to go bigger and bigger and always over exaggerating something that may not actually be important at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And it culminates in Trump, or it culminates in Brexit, that you have this, I'm going to outdo you. It's a war for rhetoric, isn't it?
Yeah. What's been interesting to me over the last year is how much more people want to connect now. People really want to feel more, I work in a world where I have to do a lot of marketing and promotion and work and things like that. And people really want to feel connected. They really want to have a relationship with people, perhaps much more than ever before. I think things were already heading that way, and maybe the whole thing with COVID and stuff has accelerated that. And many more people focusing much more now on marketing stuff with relationship, getting known, actually having some connection with people. And all the things that you talk about here, I think, are super important in being able to do that. If you're not using the right kinds of metaphors, if you're not delivering and really grabbing people by the emotions, then you're not going to be nearly as impactful as someone who can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that need for connection brings us back to when we were talking about music to start off with. Music brings people together. It creates this sense of connection. It meets within us some spiritual need, an emotional need, a desire to feel connected with other people. The people who love the same bands, they're part of a club, and they'll show their members of that club by the fashions that they take on, the way they dress, the way they behave. And I think that's what leaders, even in companies, should be looking to do, create that sense of connection. Leaders are there. Leadership is an emotional contract. You recognize what people's emotional needs are, and then you meet those needs. So at the moment, people are feeling alienated, isolated. So the leaders that offer them a sense of connection are the ones that are going to win, the ones that are going to be heard because they're meeting people's emotional needs. People are feeling afraid about the future, so they'll look for leaders who make them feel hopeful, optimistic. People are feeling confused, so they'll look for leaders that provide a sense of stability and certainty when they speak. And it's this sense, the idea that leadership is an emotional contract, basically, where the leader meets people's emotional needs. And in return for that, they then get people's support is I think, quite a useful one when leaders are thinking about how to position themselves. So, okay, what do people need here? What do you really, and then thinking about their communication from that way round.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to come back. I know we have gone forever chatting here as much as that. I'm loving speaking to you. I did want to come back to that you do work privately with people and you also run workshops on teaching speech writing, which I think I haven't really seen anyone else as much. There's too much competition in that field, right?
Yeah, no, there's not really. I think within the cabinet, most cabinet members of the cabinet have their own speechwriter, and I think I've probably trained about 80% of cabinet speechwriters going back even today. So there's not an awful lot of competition out there. But I think the thing is that people want to learn from a speechwriter who does it and who has done it at that level. That I think speechwriting, because it's creative, you need the awareness of what it's really to do it. Otherwise, it's learning cello from someone who doesn't play the cello, who's never played the cello. Fine, they might have read the books, but if you haven't faced that horror of the blank screen, or indeed the clients who's read your piece of work that you slaved over for a whole weekend, and they just send you a curt text message saying, what a load of shit. Get Bill to write it. Unless you have that lived experience of what it really means to be a speechwriter, then you can't get it. So I now do coaching sessions on Zoom with speechwriters, very, very personal. And we work through dilemmas together, everyday speechwriter dilemmas. You've got this really boring text. How can we make this more lively? You have an audience that feels, what imagery could we give them to make them feel? And we do all of this stuff together. And I've done a couple today, actually. They're great fun. I love them. And because the wonders with Zoom is that before I used to run my workshops in London and people would travel in from around the world for them. And now it's no trouble at all. So every week we'll start with how did it go last week? And every week they're coming in and they're, oh my God, I did this thing for my boss. She said it was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And then we'll talk about how to develop it. So it's really cool. And I love doing it, actually. I think I've been writing speeches now for 20 years. And it's lovely to help the next generation along, because I was in my mid-20s or so when I started. And it's lovely. I really love it when you've got people who are just trying to find their way in the speechwriting world and being able to show them this wonderful treasure chest of techniques, which is so, once you get into it, it's so enlightening. And it doesn't just concern speechwriting as well. It's so much about our modern life, not just politics, but business and our personal relationships, which are rhetoric, where rhetoric plays a role. And so I love it anyway.
Fantastic. Now, that sounds for something I'll do myself, but if someone thinks, oh yeah, that sounds really good, I'm either thinking maybe Simon would write a speech for me, or maybe I can come and learn speech writing from Simon. How can they find out more about it?
You can go to my website. It's www.bespokespeeches.com. Bespoke Speeches, you see what I did there? And you can find my number, my email address, and this is what I do. It's what I love doing. If you've got a speech that you're really struggling to get going with, or you'd professionalize and insight over it at the last stage, then it's what I do, and it's what I love doing as well.
What has been the last great thing you read that made an impact on you?
The last great thing I read that made an impact on me, oh my goodness. I've just read an amazing book, actually, called The Queen of Bloody Everything by a writer here, a British writer who's a friend called Joanna Nadin. She used to write speeches for Tony Blair, Downing Street, back in the early noughties, and she's since started writing fiction, and it's such a moving book that touches all of your emotional buttons through it. For someone of me and Joe are similar ages, and she captures the 70s, growing up in the 70s and 80s and coming through the present day so well in that book. And so I'm recommending that to everyone now. I'm not going to a thinky book, I apart from my own, which...
Well, yeah, indeed. Apart from your own, I will also include links to your recommendation and to your books. I have yet to read You Are Not Human. What is the essence of that book, just quickly?
That's all actually about the power of metaphor and dehumanization. I was motivated to write that book after Trump's ascendancy, and when he was talking about some of the foul language that he was using, call it his derogatory talk about women that I won't use here, that's that thing. But also here in the UK, some of the debate that we had about immigrants as cockroaches, Katie Hopkins, David Cameron talking about a swarm. So I was looking at metaphors, ways that groups of people within society are dehumanized. And so we have a hierarchical structure of humanity, which had sick people as vegetables, poor people as scum, women as bitches, and so on. And I tracked back the history of the metaphor and then talked about the consequences, use and consequences of the present day. So it's quite a dark book, but really one that anyone who's worried about the state of the world now and the responsibility that politicians have to speak carefully with the metaphors they use should really have a look at it. And with all of the stuff about Trump, was he using metaphor when he said fight or literal, puts it right into focus.
Yeah. Well, I now whetted my appetite, so I'm definitely going to have to go and read more of that. Simon, thank you so much for all of your time today. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. And I hope that we do get to chat again in the future. And I'm certainly going to be looking forward to reading more of your books and looking out for future works and speeches from you as well. Simon Lancaster, thank you so much.
Lovely. Thanks a lot, John. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that was Simon Lancaster. I'm very happy to say that I had the honour of hosting Simon's very first podcast guest appearance. It's easy to see why this episode became one of the most downloaded in the history of the show. And I have cleaned up some of the elements of this as well to make it an easier, cleaner listen for you too. And if you want a simple takeaway, it's this: your audience doesn't just process your words, they absorb your metaphors and your emotional signals and your certainty, whether you earned it or not. If you found this valuable, please do two things. Firstly, make sure you're subscribed to the show so you don't miss what's coming next, which is going to be my interview with one of the most downloaded TED Talk speakers ever, Julian Treasure, and share the episode with one speaker or leader who you know would value being able to improve their communication skills. Thanks for listening. My name is John Ball. I'll see you next time.